welcome. Here we are talking about coaching and psychedelics. I'm here as usual with Heather. Hey, Heather.
Hello. Hi.
And very special guest, Joe Moore from Psychedelics Today is with us today.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you for making time. It's really great to tap into the minds of people who've been in this for some time. You've been doing a lot of work, not just with Psychedelics Today, a lot of work in holotropic breathwork. There's a few projects that you've started since. So what we usually start with, before we're going to get into some of that more formal, what do you do and who are you, is what do you say at a dinner party if somebody's next to you and they don't know you and they're like, hey, what do you do?
I had this with my landlord the other day. I teach doctors and therapists about psychedelic drugs. That's my quick one. Yeah.
And is there a standard reaction to this?
Oh, fascinating. I heard about this in Michael Pollan, or did you see that recent thing in New York Times, ... I'm like, yeah, cool. But yeah, like that's the start. And that's, typically people aren't that freaked out. If I'm really nervous and don't want to get into it, I teach doctors and therapists about drugs generally, So I got the safe answer and the more edgy answer, just one word difference.
So who are you and how did you get into this work?
I've been asking myself who I am, Heather, for a long time.
Haven't we all?
we share a love for existential philosophy, I've heard in a different podcast.
Oof, it's something. Yeah. So I am from the Northeast of the United States. I grew up in New Hampshire. I did an undergrad in philosophy at Plymouth State University, so a state school in New Hampshire. I went there because I could snowboard every day and rock climb when there wasn't snow.
Nice.
So I still live in the mountains, so that passion held true. And I got into some really interesting stuff as part of my philosophy program. That's where I learned about psychedelics. I essentially was initiated into a whole mystery tradition based in Indian religion as part of my undergrad, which is kind of a weird one. That's a whole ball of wax. It took 4 years for that whole thing to develop. But my second year, I found out there were some holotropic breathwork people in the next state over in Vermont. And I started going there and learning about holotropic breathwork. Eventually, I was invited to help out at workshops. So that would cover my gas. And as a poor college student, that would really help out. And I just kept showing up. I'm like, this is the best thing I've experienced, outside of extreme sports. So of course I'm going to keep going. It's really just a great way to connect with people. And the people there were interested in psychedelics too, because holotropic breathwork comes from Dr. Stanislav Grof, the pioneering Czech LSD psychotherapy pioneer. Yeah, like he was there at the beginning in the 50s. And I think his first dose was 1956. So I was just plowing through all the work of Dr. Stanislav Grof, hanging out with people who were also doing the same. And my life has never really been the same after that. And, just a deep passion for psychedelics. So studying this stuff since 2001 and, active in a public sense since probably 2008, 2007. So, just really pushing it. And the way the planet is going, I can't say that psychedelics will help and be the answer, but I think they can help and can be used skillfully to help us navigate these next pivotal 9 years that the IPCC says we have left to adjust our planetary situation before climate change is unreasonably we can't come back if we don't make it in this next 9-year period. And I think psychedelics can play a big role in that, helping us have a better relationship to the planet, to each other. War has quite a climate toll. So how can we slow that down?
Yeah.
Psychedelics.
I hope, right? You can't shoot a gun on acid very well.
Yeah, that's true. I certainly think they contribute. And if we take that kind of systemic view of coaching, then we're not just working with individuals. We're always working with nested systems. And if we look at us in an ecosystem, there's psychedelics just take you take 15 steps back, more like, going to the moon and looking at actually our system here. And that's something that very, very often happens to people. And I think you just get catapulted out of your individual perspective and into a more community perspective. And that's a starting point, that kind of awareness, even if it's a moment, that kind of awareness can shift a lot for people.
That Carl Sagan pale blue dot moment, right? Like not the view from the moon, but the view from like Neptune. And it's just this small, tiny dot. And that's everything we're fighting over and doing is on this small little dot amongst an infinitely large backdrop. It's like, what are we doing? Should I really be upset that they discontinued the cereal I like? Like, what should I be spending my time on?
This is such a common coaching question, right? What should I be spending my time on? What is the meaning and purpose, not just of my existence, but like my job, my career? I want to do something that means something. How can I do that? And psychedelics just open those doors.
Yeah. There's a lot of meaning making that can happen in a psychedelic experience.
Indeed.
Yeah. And, questioning of our path. Like, do I want to be working on, oil extraction in Congo? Or like Northern Canada? Probably not. Like the meaning there is a little different from what, it might look like if you're doing humanitarian aid somewhere.
Or even sitting in a cubicle. I mean, what meaning does that have? You're not destroying the planet actively, but.
Well, perhaps you're a Greenpeace at a cubicle. Like there's good jobs in cubicles, but largely I'm done with cubicle life. I did a lot of time in software. So I'm like,
cubicles.
Oh yeah, too well. But I've been remote since 2011 maybe. Yeah, thank goodness.
Well, before we kind of get more into, the value of coaching and how you got into that, we had just a brief conversation beforehand. You're not maybe the classical or traditionally trained coach in terms of, grow model or performance coaching or going through the coaching schools, but you have done work on integration. You have worked with individuals. You have helped people do prep work. You do a lot of education, which, many coaches, they have that kind of educational aspect or hat on as well. So could you just give us a frame for your work? Because most of the people listening will be coaches. So I think it would be good to kind of put a frame around your work.
Right. Well, let's see. So with Psychedelics Today, we are primarily a blog and a podcast, but we have done in-person events. And, we have this program called Navigating Psychedelics, and we try to, when I do it in person, it's a lot more customized. It's like, okay, where do you want to go? And like, how can I help you get there? And, that's just a fundamental human interaction, right? Like,
it's also a fundamental coaching question.
Right. Like exactly. I can be the Yoda to your Luke Skywalker to a degree, because I've been around for a long time and I know a lot of people. Interviewed I probably got over 300 podcast episodes available. So like, where can I help you get to that end point? And it's very different in holotropic breathwork, which I've spent a lot of time in. And I facilitate a modality that comes from holotropic breathwork called dream shadow transpersonal breathwork. And this method opens people up and has them questioning, what they're doing or helping them through healing. So this is like, it's really open-ended. It's just holding space is what I do there. And helping people with that, making them very comfortable and feel safe, as opposed to like, okay, like how can I help you get that job at Exxon or whatever? I don't know why oil keeps coming up for me, by the way. It's just on the mind, I guess.
I noticed.
So in our classes, so we run a pretty often an 8-week program for therapists, doctors, nurses, etc. And I'm actively coaching those people, helping them figure out their way through this weird landscape of psychedelia that's emerging. It's legal some places, illegal plenty of other places, and what compounds haven't been made illegal or are prescribable by a physician, and how can you get there? So like helping people navigate the weird legal landscape as well as the ethical landscape, because there's a lot of groups out there that doesn't make a lot of sense to work with, like the monopolists, for instance, that don't want a big ecosystem. They want to own the ecosystem, right? Like the kind of Amazon approach, which is helpful for some reasons, horrible for other reasons. And this is something that people need to make their own mind up about. How do you make up your mind about working for these groups? Like I had a friend recently get 3 job offers from organizations, 2 of which were questionable and the other one was fine in the psychedelic space, and was able to kind of say, hey, like, do their ethics really align with you, and do you want to be there? Turning down fantastic jobs, which is kind of counterintuitive, right? But it's like, if they're not ethically aligned organizations, does it make sense to be there? Like, we want to be in alignment. I finished up NLP training recently, by the way, so I have some coaching language. But yeah, like, are we in alignment with our values and goals by working for organizations we don't necessarily like?
There's
probably not.
There's something really interesting in there in terms of, because you talked about coaching as holding space and asking questions, but you also talked about coaching as kind of guiding and educating.
There's a lot of different frames. Yeah.
Do you in your experience, have you seen one work better than the other in some contexts or others?
It depends on what people want, right? Like, some people really want that coach to kick their ass and get them to where they say they want to be. And I think that's great. Like, some people need that and some people should get that. And the thing I'm more philosophically aligned with is, what's really going on inside you, and why do you want that, and why do you want to get there, and how do you get there, and feel good about how you got there. So we have to do a lot of self-discovery before we say, yeah, I want to have a nice suit and, be in the high rise in Manhattan and doing finance or whatever. Like, that's, some people want that, but some people do not. Some people want to just be a gardener and, a lovely, or like a farmer, or, some people are struggling with their relationships with their families. You should, you're of childbearing age. You should be having 8 children by now. What's wrong with you? And how do you navigate that? And this is a weird cultural thing a lot of people in our generations are going to have to struggle with. Thankfully, my parents quit. But, this is, I like this self-discovery approach, the more anarchic, like, I'm not going to put my ideologies on you whatsoever. And my thoughts really are mostly like, what is in there? What do you got? What were you put here on earth to do? That's my personal inclination. Why were you born?
Why do you like that most?
My personal inclination? Well, empire is disgusting and it wants you to fit into the mold, right? Like, are you just another brick in the wall, a la Pink Floyd? Or are you going to figure out what's going on for you and do it? Because I think it's beautiful to see artists and business people doing the most beautiful things that they're capable of, and keep progressing in those, right? Versus, okay, I'm gonna go do some more bookkeeping, or, yes, boss, I'll make sure my lunch is only 25 minutes today. Like, that kind of stuff is horrible. It's like the enslaved higher primate. And can't we have the more freed higher primate that is also kind of loves other primates and hopefully loves everything, so that the planet, our fancy DNA library, can survive hopefully a few more thousands of years. So like, this is, I don't see empire as going that way. I see empire as kind of squashing people and fitting them into the hive, as opposed to liberating them from the hive. There's literature and movies that kind of all supports this, and, philosophy kind of, what is the goal? Is it just to be ethical and serve Jesus, or is it something a little bit more? Maybe there's something equally as divine inside that we need to unfold. I don't know. This is just my orientation that I've landed on. Answers are hard to come by. So I think people need to figure that out for themselves. We should develop some really beautiful myths and stories around that.
Yeah, I can hear both the philosopher and the activist speaking. It's amazing.
So I'm curious, when would you send someone to, like, if you were going to refer somebody out, when would you send someone to a coach versus a therapist? And what do you see the differences are there?
I love this debate between coach and therapist. It's, if they're about to do serious harm or are barely getting by on a day-to-day, I feel like a therapist is more appropriate. But that said, some coaches are magicians with tools like NLP and whatnot. Like I've had some wild experiences that I don't think most therapists are equipped for. So there's a liability thing here too. Like, am I going to get a lawsuit if I send somebody to a coach versus go this medical route, please? But I think coaches and therapists, there's a lot of overlap here. And therapists have a lot of rules about what they can and cannot do. Coaches have a lot less rules, which I think is fantastic because there's a lot of stuff that doesn't fit into this clinical model that coaches can execute on. Like making suggestions for one, like please call your mother twice this week, something like goofy like that.
Do you see that specific to the psychedelic space or in general?
This therapist coach thing? No, all over.
Yeah.
All over. Up and down, right? Like think about a functional medicine coach versus like a first year doctor that graduated last in his class. Like I'm going to want to go to a badass functional medicine coach and feel really good as opposed to, slap some antibiotics on there.
There you go.
Like use this cream for your, eye infection. It's like, no, I want to feel really good. And this is like, I've been going through a lot with post-COVID or long haul or COVID with some close people in my world. And, an allopath, like a regular traditional doctor, it's like, well, these symptoms don't line up with my grid. Therefore, okay, you just have headaches. And it's like, fuck no. Like this is a really serious situation that's taken a year off this person's life. They're not normal headaches. And like, you didn't take the time. Nobody's taken the time in allopathic medicine to help people with this new weird disease, new weird syndrome. And a functional medicine coach making the organism really, really, really healthy, like a la Rudolf Steiner and like the biodynamic farming. Like, let's get this one entity really, really healthy and a great symbiote for its neighbors. Like, how can we do that? And we need to get really healthy, so we got to hire those right people. And, people need to be a little bit more active in who they're seeking out too. Like, therapist isn't the only way. Coach isn't the only way. Maybe we need 5 people on our team.
I agree that there's a ton of coaches who do fantastic work with no kind of formal training, or they're not a member of the ICF or the AC or the MCC, or, they haven't gone through years and years of formal training, but they do fantastic work because they have a lot of experience with people. They hold beautiful space and they're equipped with some really amazing tools that work, even though they might not be certified in them. At the same time, there's also a lot of cowboys out there who just do what they think coaching is. And that can be a real risk. And as someone who's spent a lot of time in that kind of space and, having educated quite a lot of, people who take their education seriously, what do you think about that?
Ooh, this is a favorite and blood boiling topic of mine. So there's a lot of dangerous facilitators out there. And I'll start with a licensed therapist doesn't mean you're a good psychedelic sitter. And even going through a 9-month or a 2-year program doesn't mean you're good at facilitating either. In fact, you could be more dangerous. In kind of the skiing world, if you take the safety class for avalanches, you're more likely to get killed in avalanches after you take the safety class. So doesn't that mean you're more likely to have a really serious psychedelic situation come up after your training? In my observation, yes. And there's people out there, facilitators with great renown, who actually go up and will tase people with electric prods mid dosing session.
But we were talking about like facilitating as in being present during the experience.
Right. Giving them the drugs, being, helping them consume and all this. And I hope this isn't too far off base with where we were going.
No, just to kind of, I think it would be helpful to just get a frame around it, because what I usually distinguish is the preparation work, the guiding or sitting with people, and the integration work. And personally, as a coach, I wouldn't want to sit with people just because I don't want to mix these two up. I think there's benefits of being there, but also it's probably tempting to, when you had conversations, to somehow get involved. And personally, that's a bit too hot for me yet, because people are very vulnerable in that state. And I don't want to be in a situation where I have a real influence on them. So I'd rather pick up the coaching work when the experience is over and they come to integrate.
And I like being there mid-experience. So, yeah.
Right. There's so many reasons to be there, and there's a number of reasons not to be there.
Yeah.
And it's a hard thing to cross. So like preparation wise, this is a tough one because there's a myriad of ways to prep somebody for a session, right? There's like, okay, thanks for sitting in my couch. You're about to eat drugs. Now eat drugs. Like that's the basic. Like, or I fed you drugs and you didn't even know. And then there's people that spend hours and hours and hours of preparation developing a rapport with somebody in some sort of therapeutic or rapport building exercise. And that's what I'm not a therapist, right? So when I did my sessions in Jamaica, I did 6+ hours before even meeting the people in Jamaica. And I offered them an equal amount of time after for, integration. And so we call it preparation, integration, and this is a whole ball of wax. You could write, 50 books on this topic, no problem.
Could you give us some examples of the preparation work you would have done one-to-one with people? You say there's different options. I would love to make that a bit more tangible for people who might be listening.
Right. So this has actually been an active discussion between the underground and some of the university people recently. So when I do this, I want to tell somebody, hey, here's the broad range of possible experiences. This is called informed consent. So we want to make sure they understand that almost anything they can imagine could happen. At the same time, you're Shiva creating the universe. You could be, an alligator going after some zebra. I'll leave it a little mild, like there's, and those things could be experienced at the same time. And what does that mean? And then, you could be reliving the experience of the US Civil War or some battle in Europe. Like there's no end of possibilities for things you could experience.
Isn't there a risk of priming people?
Exactly. So this is the debate. So is it informed consent even if we prime somebody is a very good question. Like don't prime them, but all of a sudden... Sorry to interrupt,
but maybe just to say priming for people who are not familiar with the term is when you say, oh, this could happen or that could happen and that could happen. And because we said that, it's in people's minds and then it's more likely to happen.
Right. So this is from my training in the holotropic breathwork world. This is kind of the Grof model. Like, is it a big deal that we say that? So Matt Johnson at Johns Hopkins has written a little bit about this, suggesting that we should keep our ideologies out of it and not be saying, oh, hey, here's my religious views, please take them. And he's saying like us saying you might have this experience as a metaphysical priming. Whereas I'm like, there's no metaphysics, it's an experience. Like just because you experienced it doesn't mean there's some sort of metaphysical truth behind that. And it's a really complicated argument. I'm not there yet on, where I stand. I think we need to do more experimentation as opposed to like, let me make this theory and say everybody should follow this theory. I'm not there yet. Grof had great results. Holotropic breathwork has great results. Even if there's a little bit of weird, metaphysical priming or like storytelling. So I'm not totally settled on where I want to sit on this one. But I know we need to spend more time researching this. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting too, because everyone's different. Everyone's experience is very different and yet they're similar too. So,
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how does this, physicalist atheist in Maryland, relate to somebody who grew up in the deep South of the US, like wildly religious, or, a hardcore Buddhist that's, from Thailand? Like what does that relationship look like? And does the lack of informed consent help or not? Like, who is it helping and why? Is it for the rating, the person that's like helping prep the data for the paper, or is it something else? Yeah, I just think we're not settled on this one yet. I would love to have more time with Matt Johnson to break this one down further.
Yeah, me too.
I'll probably do this in the future with him.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, right? Because we want people to have an experience, but also it's so tempting to offer people help. And I think that's where a lot of coaches are very tempted to jump in with something that has helped them, so it can also help others. And I take an issue with that because, what helped you is not necessarily what helped others. And I think too many coaches are not really aware of that. I see so many coaches, particularly in the psychedelic space, and not just coaches. It's like, I've had this experience, and then I've had this psychedelic experience, and it blew my heart open, or it changed my whole life, or, I took MDMA and then this happened. And now I help people like me to get where I am. It's a powerful story. And that's why people who struggled with the thing that they struggled with, they would want to have the same experience. And, while you can have a similar experience, it's impossible to have the same experience. And, but I see that a lot. And that's, I find that concerning. Too many stories of, here's my story and I want you to have my story.
Oh, yeah. How often is that sold? It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's like, this is not about you having that same experience I had on Mount Sinai. This is like, you're going to have this other experience that's you. This is about uncovering what's inside you and your relationship to the world. This is not about, furthering a particular mythology or religious thing. Because people can have, in psychedelic sessions, experiences on par with these, biblical, mystical experiences. And, Hindu scripture describes these things pretty well. And you can have those on psychedelics. Doesn't mean, like, what does that mean if you have that experience and you go back and you're still an asshole to everybody in your life? Like, did it really work? Like, it was a cool experience. You probably liked it, but was it really helpful? Like, does it give you more tools for navigating the world? Like, not necessarily. So a mind state being very different from a stage of development. I think we need to separate experience, mind states from stages. This is a Ken Wilber idea, spiral dynamics. I'm sure that's big in the coaching world a little bit, but it's, how do we, yeah, right. It's a really interesting avenue of discussion. Cause you can have this enlightenment experience too. And then, so this is where those bad facilitators, there's a number of really kind of disturbing people out there. This one gentleman will cattle prod people and pour water down their throat while their autonomic nervous system is suppressed by the drug. And then there's people that throw up on their clients saying it's energetically helpful. What kind of bullshit is that? Right? Like, there's no data showing that cattle prods and vomiting on your clients is helpful, but they're out there being really successful because they're really good storytellers and compelling. It helps when you have really magical eyes as a coach, right? I'm sure you all have seen this. Like, if somebody has eyes, they get a lot more clients. It's like, what? Yeah, right?
The California stare. I've been educated.
Hey.
Yeah. Like,
I'm from California and I have blue eyes.
So
that's my new thing.
This compelling look, like, I think the Jesus look is this archetype, the long hair, beautiful eyes, compelling face. Like, this is something that's going to suck people in, and it does regularly.
Yeah. And that's where we need more research, especially into coaching. I mean, I'm coming from an academic background into coaching through positive psychology. I've always appreciated that. But it's also really difficult to get good research on coaching because it's so dependent on the relationship. Like, what are you actually measuring? Are you measuring the 10 questions you're asking or a specific methodology? Or are you measuring the relationship? And you can control for some confounding factors, and you can try to get to closer to isolating what coaching actually does and what it is. But it's such a huge umbrella term. It's difficult to find really good data.
So this is a tough one, right? Because we're now living in this kind of quantified self world, right? Where people want measurement and they want to be able to push and see that they have pushed and got results, right? But a lot of results are intangible, and it's a really hard deal. This is something that we've been struggling with in psychedelia and psychology, particularly, for a long time. So we've got the Pavlovian school, right? Like, clearly your result is kind of binary, right? On or off. And then we've got the more humanistic traditions coming out of, like, Maslow, Grof, Jung. Like, how do we really measure that? Like, is there a measure for how engaged in your life are you? Like, I don't really think so.
That's why CBT is still the most accepted form of therapy, because it's
easier to research, right?
Easier to research, exactly.
So, like, how do we reconcile humanistic and behavioral traditions? And this goes back to philosophy, like, the Enlightenment versus the romantic idealist traditions. Like, where do we go?
There's some good people in the coaching and therapy space. Mick Cooper, for example, is one who's researching humanistic traditions versus CBT traditions versus pluralistic traditions involving the client. And they're creating a lot of really good data that we can draw on as coaches. So that's helpful. What I recently started thinking about is to what extent the placebo effect works in there. And what you just mentioned really plays into that. It's like if you work with a Jesus kind of character and they have the eyes and they have the long hair and they have the powerful story and you really believe that they're going to help you, you're much more likely to get helped. And there's good research in therapy around this as well. Lambeth and somebody else researched and found that a quarter of what we can influence, the quarter of the success of the therapy that isn't client factors, outside factors that we have no control over, is actually hope and expectations. And if we think that psychedelics are going to help us or coaching is going to help us, then we're much more likely to get helped.
And
we're calling it the pollen effect. Sorry,
exactly.
Go ahead, Heather.
What's wrong with that?
No, I was saying, what's wrong with that? I mean, if it works, it works, right?
You got to amplify placebo, 100%. Like, we need to leverage it, own it.
The brain is so powerful. It's been proven that thoughts can create a lot of things. So if you believe something's going to work, what's wrong if it does, or if it's not the actual? I mean,
the argument is that if somebody chooses a placebo over something that is proven to help them, or has strong evidence. I don't like the word proof really, but then you're kind of robbing somebody of getting even better help. Because if they believe that something's going to help them and it is shown to be helpful, then surely that's the better way of helping.
But what has been proven to be 100% effective? Or I don't think we really have anything.
Life is 100% effective at producing death.
Exactly.
But I don't know what else.
I mean, I don't think we have anything that's perfect or that we know.
But how many doctors get training on placebo? Like, imagine if there was training on introducing placebo to the clinical room.
Or nocebo too.
Amen.
If you think something's not going to work, it's also not going to work.
Right.
Well, if you get a bigger cup with watered down ayahuasca, with the same active ingredient in, just because it's a bigger cup, people will have more of an experience.
Is this studied? That's a fascinating idea.
Not with ayahuasca, but with pills.
That's really cool.
If you get a bigger pill of a painkiller, then it reduces your pain more, even if it's all sugar. I'll
try to experiment with that at a festival this summer and report back.
If you need help, let me know.
That's fascinating.
Keep it double blind, yeah?
yeah, totally. Wow. I really dig that. That's a really neat idea. So in the psychedelic space, they're calling it the Michael Pollan effect, because his book, How to Change Your Mind, changed a lot of minds. And people got very high expectation as a result of how well the book was selling. Gwyneth Paltrow jumping on board, all these big names saying, oh yeah, psychedelics helped me. And now everybody's excited and going, oh, this is probably going to help me too. So they're coming in with this Michael Pollan-sized priming to research at NYU, Hopkins, etc. And they're saying, oh, I read this book. I want to get in your study because I have high expectations for this treatment. So
already biased.
How do we isolate those particular, like the cultural baggage people are bringing in as individuals to the research room? And then how do we separate research from treatment? Because we need, research should be very rigorous. Treatment, I think we can have a little bit of wiggle room, right? If we're keeping it in the medical frame. If we go to the coaching frame, it's very different. Yeah.
I would hope that the research would really stick to, does this help people and not, I mean, I see it as, does this help people? That's the goal of it.
That kind of brings me to that question around what should coaches have done, in order to do this work safely and effectively? Because you're in the education space, and there's a lot of debate around what kind of training coaches need in order to help somebody. And not just coach training, but general education around psychedelics I would include in that as well. What do you think, Joe?
Let's break it down.
I mean, it's part,
request assistance.
Despite your course, obviously, navigating psychedelics, that is a must.
Right. So let's start with preparation, right? So we'll go preparation, experience, integration. So in terms of preparation, a coach isn't equipped necessarily to do this on their own. A coach should develop a team. So people need to have a bit of a little bit of analysis done on the individual, both on the physical medical side and the psychological medical side. So let's get a profile built, like what medications are you on? What are the interactions? Is your heart in okay shape to be really stressed out for a few hours? Can you handle high blood pressure for a short stint? So things like this are, we want to get a doctor and a therapist or psychologist to help us check these people out. Like,
so you would outsource the screening process?
I would advise most people to do that. Because you never know, like your client could be lying to you about what meds you're on, and all of a sudden that becomes your problem.
I think that's wise.
Right.
It's hard too, because they could also lie to a doctor. I mean, as a nurse, they could lie to me just as easily as they could lie to anyone else.
I've lied to plenty of doctors, right?
Right.
Don't tell my doctor. Now, after they yelled at me for smoking pot, I'm like, okay, like,
done.
Not talking to you.
You don't know me
again. Yeah, you don't know me. Yeah. Working on finding the right doctor still. Like we don't know what their condition is going in. So we want to get them checked out. We want to like make sure they're getting an annual physical, that kind of stuff. And, generally healthy. Are you healthy enough? So as a coach, screen people, like if they're under 60, maybe that's good. If they're under 40, like they're probably really healthy. But we also want to consider, are they old enough? Like what is the impact of doing this with a 21-year-old versus a 28-year-old? You haven't yet lived at 21 for the most part, like your experience of the world, you're still kind of developing that. And your brain is still developing. So you have physiological, psychological development still in play. So this is a factor to consider. Yeah. What else?
Do you know screening tools that are out there? Because we had that conversation in our professional section, Coaching Psychedelics, a couple of times.
Apps, but I don't really remember what they are. We've got a couple like workbooks, like trip journal and an integration workbook, and those are helpful for like prep. So we actually put in stuff like this is how you should prepare yourself. Like, so say for example, I was going to work with somebody, like my ideal would be that they get, 2 float tank sessions in, they get some talk therapy in before coming to do a session with me, and also be talking to me in the meantime. And then, do you have time for a holotropic breathwork session before you jump in with these drugs? Cool. Like fit that in. And then, so 2 floats, hopefully a daily meditation and journaling practice to like start bringing the material forward. Because a lot of this is about making the unconscious conscious and figuring out what to do with it after it's conscious. So things like therapy, journaling, meditation, float tanks, bring that stuff forward.
What kind of meditation?
Whatever. Like I'm not too specific. I particularly like the the version of transcendental meditation before it was commercialized. And the mantra is not all complicated and proprietary. It's just LAM or RAM, LAM, RAM. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like that's what happened before you charged $3,000 to learn how to meditate, right? Vipassana meditation's perfect too. Like there's no, Vipassana meditation and Stan Grof are pretty close. Stan Grof's family priest is Jack Kornfield, a famous meditation teacher. So in the Vipassana tradition. And, Vipassana is wonderful. There's so many different ways to meditate. There's so many different neurotypes. This is a new theory of mine. It's not a simple spectrum of like autistic spectrum disorder or not. It's like, there's so many different neurotypes that we don't have the sophistication yet to talk about it skillfully. So hopefully here's to wishing. So that would be ideal. And then just a lot of time simmering inside on what do I want? Why am I doing this?
Setting intentions.
Right. And asking yourself like I like this idea of setting intentions, but it always feels a little contrived to me. Because it's like, way? I want everything to get out of my way so I can get that job, versus what is my subconscious? What does my body want to tell me?
Right. And I think this is exactly where the value is offered from coaches or any form of person who's helping you prepare for such an experience. It's not just like set an intention and writing down. It's like working to create the intention. It's like, what does it mean to you to, I don't know, get that job, or, whatever that intention is, what lies behind it, what motivates it, what's the drive. And if you have a few conversations about that, rather than just setting an intention and writing it down, it's just so much more powerful, and it'll amplify that experience.
Active emotional investigation into this with somebody else, like a coach helping you. Like, that's a big deal. And I'll imagine how big and emotional a coach could help you get around this. Like, I think that's really a big deal and really helpful for a lot of folks. Yeah, like I would have loved that kind of thing going into my sessions. I never really had that kind of help. And psychedelics, because of the taboo, are disjointed from people being able to get that kind of help often. I think now, 2021, people are a lot more comfortable and open. There's a lot more therapists willing to talk about this, and same with coaches. Like in the year 2000, how many coaches really wanted to discuss psychedelics or had the ability? Like very few, I think.
Yeah, that's why we need to talk about it, because more and more coaches offered work in this space, but nobody's talking to each other, because either you're underground or you're not quite sure about the legal status. And, is it okay? Like, obviously giving somebody drugs is not okay, from a legal perspective, depending on what the legal situation in the country is. But if somebody had an experience, it could be a psychedelic experience, could be any experience, and they want to go and talk to somebody to integrate it, I can't see anything illegal with that. And so that's why it's so important that coaches are out there. They're doing work. They're doing a lot of harm reduction. Integration, I think, is generally safe. If somebody comes to you to prep, I guess you could be seen as colluding with somebody and engaging in an illegal activity. But then most coaches I know would say, well, I strongly encourage you do this legally, and I work with you to make sure that you're safe. Could you talk a little bit about the kind of legalities of this work? And what coaches or what anybody who wants to help people prep or integrate, maybe let's keep the sitting with out of this for the time being. What do they need to know? What's that face? People who are listening can't see it.
Oh man, no, I'm just like, okay, what year do I start with? I guess let's start with where we're at. So most psychoactive substances that are helpful in the psychedelic world are illegal in most countries. There's exceptions all over. Netherlands, Jamaica, there's ways to access legal psilocybin. There's other countries as well. I think
there's a good list on Wikipedia.
Nepal. Yeah, right. Like Nepal, might even have legal psilocybin, which is fascinating. I love to do mushrooms in Nepal, but you've got to really just dig deep to find out what's legal, what isn't. So in the United States, we have access to cannabis in many states. You can do cannabis-assisted psychotherapy and cannabis-assisted coaching sessions. Absolutely. High dose smoked, very similar to what you might see in an ayahuasca container. I would probably suggest one-on-one if you're trying to learn this stuff. And there's some recent books. I think Psychedelic Cannabis by Daniel McQueen is a new book on how to do this. Salvia divinorum is legal in many states. It's traditionally used in religious contexts in Mexico when mushrooms are not in season. And it's very powerful. It's got a lot of taboo because YouTube really blew it out when it kind of came on the scene. But used orally, chewed and stuffed in your little thing between your jaw and teeth here, like in between your gum. And so that's a way to do it. It's legal in many places, not legal in Colorado where I am, but it's legal elsewhere. That would be an amazing avenue to look at for legal use domestically in the United States. If you're looking internationally, it's incredible what's not scheduled in places. Like I think 5-MeO DMT is not it's not criminal to possess it in Prague, Czech Republic. It is highly illegal in many other places. You can find it in natural sources in the United States, though. There's some endangered species issues there, so careful. But you got to really just understand the legal landscape, and then how to qualify your purity. Like, how pure do you think your drug is that you got, right? How would you know? And how do you feel ethically aligned enough to be providing this to somebody else? Yeah. And then, the real legality, like, are you helping somebody commit a felony? Like, are you helping somebody to commit a crime? You've got to keep this in mind as a professional and as a business person, because the law could come down on you. Oh, like you coached Jimmy. Jimmy told us, through his journal that he kept, that you told him to go to this ayahuasca circle in Brooklyn, and all of a sudden he ended up dead. Like, why did you do that? And you're now complicit in his death according to the law, right? So how, yeah. And licensing issues too. Like, if you're a therapist and you hold a license, that's a big deal. Like, the licensing board in your state or country could straight up take your license away, and you work years and years to get that license. And how is the coaching profession? Like, would some coaching organizations revoke your certificate for certain kinds of ethic violations?
Yeah, you would need to get reported. First of all, you need to be a member of a professional body. And most coaches who work in this space, to my knowledge, are not. You can lose your credentialing if somebody reports you to the ethics committee. And I've not heard that happening unless for really sleeping, having sex with your client's partner kind of thing, that's happened. But there isn't really, it's still a very open profession. I wonder though, if that person would go to a legal retreat center in Ecuador and the Netherlands, and then something would happen there, either they have an episode or, you don't need to die, but something happens, and can their partner get back to you and say, well, we looked at the journal and, you've worked with this person and you've worked with them to prepare for this trip.
I think there would have to be some real negligence in the mix, or a financial situation. So if you took the money and then fed it to the Ecuador center, then you were kind of financially in the mix. So I would avoid that. Not a lawyer, everybody. But, I've talked to a lot of lawyers about this stuff. And if negligence, if it was really, really obvious that this person needed to be in therapy, or maybe needed 6 months of psychiatric meds before even talking about the psychedelic stuff, then perhaps you could get hit with some negligence. But often it's conspiracy to commit crime. Even if it's illegal or legal where you're going, like Jamaica, Ecuador, there could be some complicit, some way to loop you into a crime, an offense, if you were in the mix, deeply. So and if you're doing everything in a particular country, that country's rules probably apply. So if you're doing all this in the US, but you're saying, go there and I'll take your money and help you, then you might be really in the mix.
Yeah, I'm wondering about coaches who partner with particular retreat centers because they trust the retreat centers. And now there's some, I'm not sure if that partnership, maybe they wouldn't get a cut from the person they sent to the retreat center, but I could imagine that. So it's good. It's a good word of warning, I think, to be careful with that sort of thing.
And maybe talk to 2 lawyers just to be a little bit more sure.
As a provider, get a lawyer?
As a coach, get a lawyer.
As a coach, okay.
Before you're going to do this work, if you're going to commit to this field, have a consult, or at least give a lawyer, a few $100 just to be sure you're safe. And jail is, court is expensive. Jail is not worth going to. And if you can avoid it, avoid it.
Wise words, man.
Right? It's don't cut your arm off if you can avoid it. I have hamstrung myself financially by not selling drugs. I could have made a lot more money selling drugs and helping people do sessions all the time. I chose not to do that because I'm high profile and don't really want to afford that kind of, risk for that benefit. And you as an individual provider should be saying, what kind of risks am I willing to take? And should I be? Because nothing's 100% safe. You cannot prove safety. People die in ayahuasca. People die from MDMA. Some of the major research groups have certainly covered up some deaths. not enough for me to be too alarmed, but it's, a little bit unethical. But yeah, like these things aren't perfectly safe. Suicide can happen. Bad interactions with the drug can happen. Yeah. So I go overboard, right? Like I had 2 doctors, plus 2 nurse practitioners checking my people out. I think there was like a psychiatrist, a therapist, multiple doctors checking my people out to say, yeah, we're okay. And I'm like, okay, great. Like now I feel good about this, and I feel.
Did you organize those practitioners, or was that
it was their facilitators plus my consultants? So I had a psychiatrist and an NP on my side, and I wanted to hear from their therapist, psychiatrist, and primary care as well. To go, okay, like, is there anything I need to worry about? Y'all know the score, and they, being licensed providers, they had to like write stuff to me in code, like. Yes, she's fine for summer camp. I'm like, that's ridiculous, but okay.
Strenuous activity.
Yeah. Like, it's a ridiculous message, but fine.
Okay.
And this is where I think, like if we're going to be doing this in a more integrated fashion, partnering with centers, we should probably be looking at electronic health record releases. Like how do we get good, solid data from their primary providers so we know we're being safe? Like, I know there's some privacy stuff in the mix here, but people's safety should be paramount if we're doing this stuff.
But shouldn't people take care of their own safety? I mean, it's good that somebody works with them to like harm reduction, but like ultimately as a coach, I work with people who are resourceful, and I would trust the person that I'm working with that they make the right decision for their health and safety. And I don't want how much responsibility can I take for my client, and what message does that send?
When you're suggesting you give them drugs or they go somewhere to have, a substance and a psychedelic experience, like that's a lot of responsibility, right? Like that's kind of where I'm coming at. Like, let's let them suggest it first.
Yeah.
And then you help them, right? As opposed to, you might really do well by going to, XYZ place in Costa Rica or Peru. Or this place in Jamaica. And it's like, wow. Yeah,
it's a risky suggestion.
You haven't been to this center. You don't have a relationship with the center. So how do you even know? A lot of these places will serve up high dose and people don't know to ask. They'll put in tons of liquid nicotine or tobacco, Nicotina rustica, I think it is. And the nicotine contents can be lethal for many people. And that's in the ayahuasca. And people don't know to ask. They're like, I'm going to follow the religious tradition here and just, they've been around for thousands of years. I'll be fine. When it's like, no, you're not habituated to having this kind of high dose nicotine. Do you even smoke? Like, do you even, what's your relationship to nicotine? So in this new thing, I'm trying to figure out a way to write something on this. Like a lot of ayahuasca is fermented for months or years. And what does that do to the Western gut? Not good things sometimes. You could be sick for days, weeks, or need a hospitalization from, diarrhea and dehydration. Yeah. And do you really want that situation happening in the Amazon? Yeah. Probably not.
So I think this is where coaches need to be really clear. Like if you have that kind of knowledge, you can offer that kind of knowledge, and that will really help clients out to ask the right questions. But if you don't have that kind of knowledge, I think you can still coach people, because as a more facilitative kind of prioristic or whatever you want to call it coach, you don't provide answers. You create a space where people can find them. So a coach who doesn't know that kind of thing,
I love that.
A coach who doesn't know that kind of thing would say, hey, who do you need to ask to keep yourself safe? What conversations do you need to have? What podcast do you need to listen to, that has over 300 episodes out and educates people? What course do you need to do in order to educate? Which books would you read? I have a few books that I would recommend, but I'd much rather have my client say, I'm going to take a look and go on a quest to figure out what education I need. And I'm going to talk to a couple of people who have done it. I'm going to find somebody who went to that retreat center. And then you can ask questions like, well, how's that person like you? Are you going to have the same experience? You're not going to have the same experience, right. But you can do some harm reduction. You can never be certain about things.
And what kind of risk are you willing to take? Go ahead, Heather.
Well, this kind of just ties into something that we've asked other guests as well. And Yannick and I were talking about earlier today is, do you think providers need to have had their own psychedelic experiences to working with clients in this field?
Big topic.
Yeah.
We
talked about it 10 minutes before we started.
We were debating it earlier, but also, I mean, we've asked other guests this too, and I think it's a really fascinating question.
So I don't know if you saw this, but Canada just ran their first sessions with therapists who will be providing this. So legally above board, they're now getting access. In the MAPS protocol, there is built-in access for MDMA as part of the training, which is great. So largely, yes, I think the answer is yes. We should have experience so that we can be not surprised when scary things pop up in the room and then, infect the client with fear. If you're fearful as the facilitator, that's going to come right over. Mm-hmm. And how would you get not fearful being around tripping people when there's so many things that could come up?
Yeah. Again, I would talk about prep and integration mostly because I think and I kind of hope that most coaches aren't also sitting with people.
And if they do, they need a lot of training.
Yeah.
Like they can certainly do it, but they need a lot of training. And I think 2 years is just barely adequate in terms of training. So
for simplicity, let's erase sitting with people from this equation.
Well, let me back up and finish this real quick with the sitting, like, should a therapist have experience? I think there should be some sort of exception for those who aren't healthy enough to have an experience. Like, I think there's some sort of like Disability Act type thing, but I think there would be a drug that would help them. Like, not everybody's healthy enough for MDMA. But I think just about everybody's healthy enough for ketamine, or something like an LSD, like even a light dose LSD. Like I think most people would tolerate really well because that's in the micrograms. And worst case holotropic breathwork. And is that really worst case? No. Like I think that's actually ideal. But
and
okay.
What do you,
Heather?
No, I was going to say, well, what do you think the benefit is to that? Why?
You need to be engaged in your own work
about it.
Mm-hmm. By not being engaged in your own inner processes and landscape, there's a lot that goes
missed,
unseen, and unworked on. And it's like it's a bad metaphor, but I'll use it. It's like a festering wound. Like if you can't transmit that stuff, and you want to make sure you got your own self under control before you're going and working on with people and supporting them through really extreme states.
Yeah.
It's more important to be calm than to like have a lot of therapeutic tools to use in the room. Make sure the person feels safe and taken care of. And that's the primary, most important thing in my view. And this comes from Stan Grof. There's a lot of people that tell you, oh no, you need to do therapy and you need to be a good therapist. I'm like, sure. Like you can save the therapy for after, but I don't think in the session itself, therapists need that much activity. Mm-hmm. Like they should really just be making space for the individual's experience. And if you haven't done a lot of work, you might think, oh, I'm trained as a therapist, I need to be doing therapy. Mm-hmm. They're having a really bad experience, therefore I'm now guilty and I might go to jail. Mm-hmm. Like understanding that somebody's going to be safe after a session is a big deal. Like I know that somebody on mushrooms is very likely to survive. The substance is far safer than alcohol, and most people survive alcohol. So
I think the process of sitting with or guiding people through or during an experience is very different to the preparation or the integration work. When you look at kind of integration work, I'm excited to talk to you actually, because I talked to a lot of people and they said, well, it's absolutely crucial that an integration coach will have had their own psychedelic experiences. The more, the better.
Debatable.
And I'm coming from as an existential coach, from a phenomenology perspective. And you have to actually bracket quite a lot when you have had your own experiences. You wouldn't say that a bereavement therapist has to have lost somebody, or that somebody who works with paranoid schizophrenia needs to have been a paranoid schizophrenic in order to be able to help them. But we, like most people I meet, all of the coaches so far that I've had a more in-depth conversation about it, do say, no, you need to have done a lot of psychedelics in order to be able to help somebody integrate that experience. And it's debatable. I think so too.
But I'd also debate that a bereavement coach should have had experience loss too.
That's probably not the best example, right?
Sorry,
No, like, okay, so what's the prime material here? Like, what are we really working with? We're working with the unconscious. So we're pretty comfortable with the conscious mind. But how do we work with the vast amount of stuff that we don't understand one bit about? I think there's a lot of different angles beyond psychedelics to access the subconscious and work with it in a meaningful way. I think there's, hypnotherapy, Jungian analysis. So say you did 4 years of Jungian analysis, you're going to be pretty fluent with how the unconscious works, at least in yourself. Mm-hmm. There's, all these kind of weird therapies from the 60s, like primal scream therapy, all this stuff that shows like, oh, there's really interesting things that can come up without even drugs, just by being in group. And you can understand your landscape inside without psychedelics. Like holotropic breathwork. I did 6 years of holotropic breathwork before I used a psychedelic compound. And I think before using psychedelics, had a pretty good grasp on what was going on my inner landscape. Like a very big ayahuasca dose. Yeah, it was hard, but it was not unfamiliar. Mm-hmm. It was actually like, okay, this is inside me. I'm pretty familiar with what it's like to be inside my, inner temple or whatever, like the most secret space. Like this is not new alien territory.
Would you then discourage somebody who hasn't done any of that work to go straight into a high dose ayahuasca experience, for example? Would you recommend that somebody does a bit of holotropic breath work or does a bit of exploring first?
Well, it's what are your intentions? Like, do you want to be this coach? Then you should probably do that work. Like, it's not like, okay, yeah, you want to do psychedelic integration work, don't have an experience. It's like, well, if you can, it's probably better so you have more rapport with your client. Like that's probably the baseline argument.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, but encourage. Like, I think about my path.
I'm talking about the client now.
What would I want them to do? It depends on what they're going through, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I think mushrooms are pretty safe. If they're healthy enough to be using mushrooms, cool. If their family history is safe, great. Ayahuasca, that steps the risk up a little bit. It's a lovely compound. Like I really, really like ayahuasca. Where is the risk profile? Where should we be pushing them? I think that might be the question. Like, I think we should be pushing them to the cheapest, safest option and then slowly working it up. I read this book recently, The Concussion Repair Manual by Dr. Dan Engel, and he broke down the book, probably 30 to 40 different interventions for brain injury. And he starts with the safest, cheapest, and then slowly works up to more expensive and more dangerous. And I think that's the spectrum we should be working on. But it also, as a coach, we're like, are we Tony Robbins or are we like, the happy neighbor, like Mr. Rogers? That's like, let's keep you safe and healthy and move you forward. Whereas Tony Robbins is like, bump, bump. Yeah, it's like rapid movement, perhaps a little too quickly for some folks. Yeah. But for other folks, maybe that's okay. And this comes down to like, how do we get somebody to that stage of development versus that state? And I think this is a really useful metaphor in a lot of different things. So, when do I want somebody push them to use a compound? I don't know. Like, I don't think ever. They have to show interest before I come anywhere close to pushing. I never push, I don't think.
Yeah, I don't think as coaches is a good idea to push. Also, every time you push, you're taking on a lot of responsibility. And personally, I don't want that much responsibility, especially in a space that is very potent, because then I'm taking on a lot. And then somebody can.
We don't have good regulated centers yet.
Yeah.
Once we have safe, regulated places to send people outside of the clinical frame, we're in great shape compared to where we are right now.
Mm-hmm. As a coach, I would also, when somebody comes to me and they would seek a really high dose and really potentially very potent experience, and I haven't had done that work, I would always question, why do you want to do this? If somebody wants to dive straight in, chances are they're going to bounce back. If there's too much too quickly going on and they haven't done the groundwork. So I'm often finding myself to almost slow down the enthusiasm for jumping into something that, is a lot. If I feel, so I think it's a really useful thing to get into some holotropic breath work. As you said, sample the experience so that you're a bit more prepared for it.
Do you have like any classic books you would recommend to like a coaching client? Read this first, and then we can have that conversation.
I usually recommend the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide by Federman.
Yeah. A+.
There's so much information in there, which is really helpful. But as I said, I usually help that person to figure out what they would do. But that's that's a book I can really safely recommend, and that will just be on nothing but helpful.
Such a helpful book, and there's minimal BS.
Yeah. What about you?
That perhaps the only BS is like microdosing, like how much data is really good on microdosing, and there's not much solid, clinical research on this stuff. We'll probably have some decent clinical data on microdosing within a year.
And there's a couple of really good pieces of research that I'm also waiting for the data to get published.
Right, because you saw that self-blinded thing, and it was like no better than placebo. And I'm like, that's really tough.
Yeah.
What do we do there? Placebo is still great, but let's couch it properly. And I guess one of the good things is mushrooms and LSD are pretty cheap. Like people aren't blowing their whole bank account on this stuff, so it's cheaper than some supplements you can buy at normal stores, right? So you got that. So like you said, what do I use? Psychedelic Explorer's Guide is like one of my top picks for people to read first. Depending on who the individual is and why they're asking, I might suggest Pollen. I have a lot of issues with Pollen's book, but it's still, for the right demographic, it is the right book. But we have to kind of pick that. So demographic being Americans, white, over 50.
My parents.
Works great for that demographic. His hate on Tim Leary, consistent hate on Timothy Leary, just blows me away. And like, now I'm the rich white man that is allowed to do these drugs, and you're still not. So let's keep them illegal and in the clinical frame only. Which I'm like, no, thank you. Next, please.
He is a science writer after all. And he wanted. I think part of why he made the step to get the book out was that he's coming from a relatively safe perspective of this is for science, and I'm taking the science angle, and that's how a lot of researchers out there, people in the space, they're safe talking about it because they have the science in the back. And it encouraged me to go out there and have these conversations much more publicly, because, I'm literally came in through the science. I had my own personal experiences, but really professionally, I saw the science and I'm like, this is mind blowing, in terms of its therapeutic potential. And I could see immediately the potential through the coaching and the positive psychology research, particularly that meta-analysis by Henrik Andrea Jungabeler about positive psychological themes that have been reported in studies. And I'm like, clearly there's a link to growth, insight, development, in addition or beyond the treating, fixing of disorder, disease. So that's where the links are, I think, and it's useful to be able to argue that way, because people who are skeptical, they might not be so skeptical about science, but they might be skeptical about psychedelics. And now you can say, hey, but look, this is worth researching. This is worth looking into.
A headline one of my employees sent earlier was 65% of Americans do not think psychedelics can be used medicinally. But on the inverse, that's 35% of the population thinks it can be used. And Michael Pollan's book has only been out since 2017 or 18 or something. So we've come a long way since then. And there's no slowing it down, because now we have, the finance people in the mix. Like, I don't know if you saw this, Deepak Chopra signed up with MindMed, this LSD company, to be an advisor and help bring in integrative LSD into integrative medicine. So I'm like, that's a fascinating partnership. And, when Deepak signs on to something, it's going to be pretty successful because he's got a massive following.
Yeah, there was that
like
Netflix documentary on Have a Good Trip, and all of a sudden I see Deepak Chopra, and I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
He was kind of pessimistic in the end, but he was also like, it was interesting, but he's like, but meditate. I'm like, cool, dude. Like, yeah, you got it. I don't know if you said, like, he was selling some $5,000 meditation program in like the late aughts, like 2007 or something. I was like, yeah, still not going to buy transcendental meditation training. What Deepak, what are you up to? It's like this primordial blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, cool. What's the price? $5,000? No way, dude. Later. Like, I just want to know how to meditate. Yeah, it's interesting. But, Deepak is usually going to win. He's got a lot of deep alliances among the elite. And he's a great media person. So psychedelics aren't going anywhere. Like, it's only going to grow. And the finance angle, the amount of excitement people have in the investment space right now is nuts. It's really crazy. We've got 2 different billion-dollar companies, multiple $10 million plus companies. It's really, really wild.
Yeah. There was something I wanted to pick up. Maybe microdosing. Let's talk about microdosing a bit more, because I know coaches really like that topic, because it seems to be the kind of risk-free, or at least massively risk-reduced way to work with psychedelics. Totally. And also, often you wouldn't know whether your client might be microdosing. You might be a coach and somebody signs up and you find out later. But if somebody approaches you as a coach and says, well, I want to have some support as I am microdosing. Technically, they're under the influence of a drug, but it's subperceptual. So, it's an interesting legal perspective, but also an ethical one. But then also there's a massive lack of research or data to know whether it actually works. We can tap into the placebo, which I think coaching amplified by a placebo in that way. At worst, at best, it's coaching amplified with something that has all of those benefits that it claims to do. What do you think about that space? Because it seems to be blowing up.
It's crazy. A person I really like in the space is Laura Dawn, Live Free Laura D. She's a microdosing coach and has some really interesting stuff there. So generally speaking, let's start with definition. And you named it earlier, subperceptual. This is how Fadiman kind of titled it, subperceptual dosing. And by the way, the person that tipped Fadiman off on this concept was Robert Forte. Check him out at some point.
It's so vague as a term.
Right. So I heard somebody in Boulder, Colorado say, oh yeah, let's split 3.5 grams and we'll just microdose. So 1.75 grams or whatever, and that's a microdose. Like, not really.
It's a mini dose.
Yeah, it's still a healthy dose that could send somebody to the ER, right? If you don't know what you're doing, 1.5 grams could be really, really, really horrifying. If you know what you're doing, you might not barely notice it, right? Mm-hmm. So the dosing is a big deal. So you want to be really careful. So I push people back to Fadiman. Fadiman and Korb had some decent data years ago, but still it was all survey based, nothing clinical that we can really, really lean on and replicate, right? Mm-hmm. So I want to break it down too, because people talk about microdosing. They're either looking for like productivity boost or like a mood boost, like Ayet Waldman kind of talked about in her book, A Really Good Day, I think it was. And this stuff is probably more placebo on the psychological end. Or are people just eating more and not reporting it, and they're happy because they're high? Like when I've been microdosing LSD experimentally myself, I have a really fucking good day. But I'm also like, maybe I'm a little high. Like maybe I'm feeling the acid, and maybe this isn't a microdose. And I'm doing volumetric dosing. So like dissolving the LSD into water and like pulling out a certain number of milliliters, hoping it's a certain dose, but maybe I got really strong bladder acid. I don't know. How do you know when we don't have a regulated controlled market?
Right.
What do you actually know? And okay, so that's just LSD and psilocybin. There's people microdosing iboga, ayahuasca vine, all sorts of things. And why? Is it just psychological? Is it a spiritual thing? For some of them, it is. For some people, they're doing mini doses of iboga just to do more work in the fields. Like it's a traditional use, or be a better hunter, have more energy hunting. People are microdosing for other reasons, like regrowing brain cells, like neurogenesis and, synaptogenesis, all this fun stuff. But is there any real evidence that rules of evidence are a funny thing, obviously, but is there any evidence that just because you're doing neurogenesis, synaptogenesis, whatever, dendritic arborization is a new term I just learned recently. I'm like, cool.
Good one.
But is there real impact in how the brain is functioning beyond purely a psychological measure? And what kind of measurement tools would we need to look at to pull those out? So I think, my general position is that it's too early to say what it's going to do, but it's a cheap, relatively safe experiment. And it's certainly safer than taking a whole hit of acid or 3.5 to 5 grams of mushrooms. Certainly safer. So as an entryway, I think it's a good gateway into the psychedelic landscape, though let's not fetishize it and let's try to not lie to ourselves and others about it. Like we don't really know. So if it works for you, great. If it doesn't work for you, not a big deal. You're not broken. But maybe there's some internal biological structural things happening that long-term improve your life. Or I don't know, maybe your brain is better off a little bit, staying in that damaged state. I don't know. Like, are you better off being dumber? Like maybe sometimes for some people. I prefer intelligence.
Ignorance can be bliss.
Right.
I think the most important question for coaches is probably, is it potentially dangerous? If somebody comes to me and they want to microdose during the coaching, is there a risk? Should I say no to that?
You're in the United States, you're at a little bit of a legal disadvantage if you suggest that they do take something before.
No, let's assume that you wouldn't suggest that the client takes something. It would come from the client.
Do you mind if I do this before I come? And you can say yes or no. Like, it's a weird one. It's a really weird one. As a therapist, you could probably lose your license. I don't know if you're going to go to prison or jail, but, as a coach, like you're in a better position for sure than a therapist. I would not want somebody to be in a coaching session on a full dose of anything. I would want to make sure they were very comfortable with microdosing before coming in and talking to me, right? Like, make sure you get your way through like one of your 6-week period cycles at the end of a 2-week break and then come back and then maybe we're cool. Yeah, I would just be cautious around that.
I think that's sound advice.
Yeah. A lot of people are going to be like, yeah, like what's the problem? It's just drugs. I'm like, well, there's a lot. It's just the human psyche. Like try saying, flipping it around and saying it's just psyche. It's like, well, you should be a little bit afraid of psyche. Like there's a lot going on there.
Well, as a private person, I have an opinion on that. As a professional, I might have a different opinion on that.
Amen. Because like I've had some doctors talk to me recently and say that same thing. As a citizen X, as a doctor Y, I'm like, holy shit. Like that's really tough to have to kind of fragment like that, right? But it's like the professional opinion is that way because of certain liabilities, right? And it's hard.
Exactly. As a private person, I can take a lot more risk because it's me. It doesn't involve somebody else, and it doesn't involve, my professional career as well.
Right. Mm-hmm.
What other words of what other words of warning do you have to coaches?
I was just about to ask the same question.
Beat you to it.
It's so weird, right? I'm kind of an optimist about the whole psychedelic space, and I think we're just in early days. So there's a lot of kind of bad actors out there. So really vet somebody well. If you have the ability to wait 6 months before making a decision, do that. Really do a lot of diligence when vetting people you're going to be working with, even if it's a center that's been around for a while with reviews online. And think about like, what are your ethics? What are their ethics? Were they comfortable operating all through COVID in group psychedelic sessions, potentially resulting in injury and death of many people in the countries they're operating in? So I'm a little, I had deep personal impact from COVID, like I mentioned earlier, and we saw a lot of people in the Amazon die as a result of ayahuasca shamanism. like how many people in Jamaica died as a result of mushroom tourism through COVID. And yeah, so that's one angle. And are you comfortable working with people even though they did that? So ask yourself that. I'm not going to tell you what to believe or do, but at least ask yourself a question. I'll ask you that as a particular. And then, yeah, I think that's a pretty good one. Tim Kuhl's site, like psychedelicexperience.net, is a great place to look at reviews. I think that's really amazing. And, if you're a coach and you're going to be working with people in this space, really get a good grasp on who are the experts that you want to lean on, who are the leading voices in the space. Do they have sexual assault allegations against them? Is their name in any court documents around sexual misconduct? The answer's surprisingly high on that one, yes.
Really? Wow.
And then, we've got to really be careful and be really diligent and conscious of what we're doing. Because some of these plants and animals are endangered. Do we really want to help something go extinct? I think the answer is no for most of us. How much should an animal suffer for you to get high? Like there's this frog that gets tortured in the Amazon. Have you seen this stuff, the combo, where they burn your skin and insert the compound into your skin? Yeah, that doesn't look like a good situation to me. And I have not seen any clinical data on safety or effect of this drug. And it's a very common thing to be used in the psychedelic landscape. It's often kind of like, hey, let's do combo, AKA, are you interested in ayahuasca? Come on down, do combo, and maybe you'll get invited to my ayahuasca circle. And it's, there's some weird stuff there. There's some cultural appropriation. Like, why are we taking this culture's religious rituals and using it for our own purposes? There's healthy ways of doing it, but there's also really horrible ways of doing it. So we've got to navigate a really tricky landscape here because, we're still encroaching on tribal peoples that aren't integrated into our empire yet, right?
Yeah.
Bring it back to empire.
Yeah, it's a theme.
Yeah.
Heather, can you think of something else you wanted to ask before we move into our quick fire questions round?
No, I could start us off with those.
Well, it's not so quick fire. You can take your time. It's fine, but we found that, 20, 30 minutes is usually a good amount. Just to have a couple of questions, we definitely ask everybody at the end.
Cool.
Well, we kind of talked about books and influences of yours. Are there any that you want to add?
Dr. Stanislav Grof, LSD psychotherapy, Realms of the Human Unconscious. His book on death and dying, The Ultimate Journey, is extraordinary. Other books.
Think about coaches, particularly.
So many.
Coaches who want to help people, move forward, not necessarily in a healing modality, but in an inside growth, personal development space.
Yeah, I think like Grof, more than many others, is aligned with that because it's discovering what's going on inside of you and where you want to go and how do you get there. And it's a really self-directed approach. You're, from the coaching frame, like the Fadiman book is just excellent. But I don't like to go give people too much. The Holotropic breathwork book by Grof and Grof is really good. And it lays out the theory really well.
Yeah.
There's this other book I just found recently. I haven't got a chance to read through it yet, but he's been on our show, Cannabis for Couples. It's like, how can you and a partner do couples work together alone with cannabis as a helping agent?
Interesting.
And that was by John Selby, who I think he's a psychologist and a priest, I think living in Santa Cruz. So really interesting character. And that's just a great book filled with tools and experiments people can use.
You mentioned a microdosing coach. Do you know any other coaches?
Laura Dawn, Live Free Laura D was her name. Microdosing coaches.
Yeah, any other psychedelic coaches or microdosing coaches, just any coaches in that space that might be worth following or that already talking about the stuff or writing about it?
Offhand, no. And that's kind of a weird thing. One of my friends is a psychiatric nurse in Maine, and it might be a nurse practitioner, and he's coaching others in that space to become, more informed on this topic. But yeah, no real coaches come to mind as really incredible folks in the space. And this is a tricky question, Yannick, because like I was getting at earlier, a lot of the coaches don't necessarily want their underground activities highlighted.
Yeah,
so there's a lot of secrecy.
I wouldn't ask for them.
And there's a little bit of hesitation to share names because of the underground aspect. Usually I try to make sure I don't know people's names and illegal activities in the event of I get waterboarded or arrested or something. So, I don't know how well I'm going to hold up under torture. So I try to know as little as I can sometimes.
Yeah, fair. No, I would want to know about the overground, the ones who are happy to talk about it and happy for people to look them up.
Well, Psychedelic.support is a great place to go if you're looking for people. There's a very big global directory there, and it's got a lot of helpful information. Yeah. Psychable is another company that has some decent resources. So like really the number one key is build a network locally. Of people that you trust and kind of understand, and make it a kind of a team sport for yourself. Bring in a doctor, bring in a therapist, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I heard that loud and clear, and I think that's a really, really good recommendation. Anything on integration, any kind of integration resources? I know it's a topic we could probably talk about a long time, but are there specific resources where coaches could draw on? I'm always interested in, I know there's a lot of integration methodologies out there. Some of them translate quite well into a coaching space, others maybe not so much, but I'm just, while you're here and I know you know a lot about this, I wonder if there's any sources you would point coaches to.
Yeah. So Being True to You is a really decent training program. I don't know too much about it, but I know a lot of people get a good handle on psychedelics there. There's another group, Integrative Mental Health for You, by Emma Bragdon, and she does some really good programs for both therapists and coaches. Psychedelics Today obviously has great, navigating psychedelics course. That's, I have a hard time understanding why people would go elsewhere. So I really just check out what we've got. And there's some great stuff there in our books, the Navigating Psychedelics trip journal and the integration workbook. They're on Amazon, unfortunately, but you can get them a digital copy on our website. And that's just a really helpful workbook for people. And it's got a lot of integration tools and methods. And there's this new book, Kyle Ortego wrote this integration handbook, and I think it's going to be published really soon if it hasn't been already. He's been on our show. He's a PhD in San Francisco and has thought a lot about this for a long time. Yeah. So, you learn the clinical tools if you're a coach and just see what's going to work for you. Because I don't think anybody's worked this out from the coaching frame specifically yet.
That's what we're working on.
Glad to hear it.
Can you tell us about your most memorable client or student, someone that had a big impact on you in the space? Confidentially.
Yeah. So there's a few. This one gentleman was an acupuncturist and kind of Ayurveda consultant, also an artist. And after the course, so when we wrap up our course, there's this day where we do an extra half hour in class and everybody kind of presents an integration project. So this person actually developed a whole thing with the chakra system, Stan Grof's theories, the birth perinatal matrices, and like some sort of color theory and acupuncture, and developed this whole beautiful spread of art related to like how he was trying to make correlations between these systems that would work for him as an individual. How can I validate his method, right? But it's really interesting. And I thought that was beautiful. One person, a client from way back, we went to Jamaica. Didn't look like this was going to go very well. Really depressed person, just nothing interesting going on, no real engagement. older too, a lot of psych meds. Eventually ended up doing a 14-gram session with this person because the psych meds got in the way of the first 7 grams. No effect after 2 hours, So like, okay, let's try another 7, see what happens.
Wow.
If you had no effect on 7, that's a situation. So this person, a pretty underwhelming experience. But this person probably had the best results out of that batch of clients in Jamaica. And it was just really shocking to me. I'm like, okay, you're the person I thought was going to be the hardest case, and you were not at all. So it's a surprise twist. Go, okay, even if that person doesn't look like you're going to have the best effect, maybe you will. And I know a lot of coaches and shamans want to only work with the people that they're going to have the best results with.
What do you mean by best results?
That's just pure project. You're going to turn them into, the all-star that you wanted to. So from a coaching frame, well, let's start with shamanic. So from a shamanic frame, is this person going to get well on their own or never get well? Or if I help them, are they going to get better from this
shining
disease,
star.
whatever it is? Right. Like you're a better doctor by choosing the better clients, right? Because your people survive and do better than others. So there's a thing around client selection there. And in the coaching world, are you picking somebody who, their income's never going to get above, 30,000 US? Or are you picking the right person? You're like that person might be able to run GE at some point. Like, this is really cool. Like, let's make them a rock star. So there's some client selection stuff going on there. Yeah. So are we doing projection? Are we participating in a weird projection process when we do that? I think to a degree, yes. To a degree, no. So try to become aware to the best of your ability around projections on client selection and stuff like that. You don't know. They know themselves better than anybody else, and you just met them for a few hours maximum.
Yeah.
So what is your judgment worth? Not much.
Yeah. Here's another one. And in a way, you've already kind of spoken about that. Let's see if you want to add anything to that, or we can go to the next one, which is, what do you think about regulation, particularly in the coaching space, but probably also asking you more generally in the psychedelic space? Do we need more regulation? Is it in the way?
As far as I understand it, there's no regulation in the coaching world, right? Like we've got, it's an unregulated industry. I kind of would like to see it stay unregulated for at least another 10 years. I think there's a lot more experimentation that needs to happen. Maybe a good experiment would be like 1 or 2 smaller countries experiment with regulating it, or in the US, like 1 or 2 states, just so we have an experiment. What does it look like in a regulated market? When you said regulate, I'm immediately like legalize everything, regulate, safe supply. That's like, I immediately go to drugs when I hear regulation. So, but yeah, realistically coaching, let's keep it unregulated. I think we've got the regulated version, and that's therapy. We've had therapy for 75 to 100 years, and the world's still a mess. So do we need more coaches? Probably. And we need coaching to be a little bit more, accepted, right? In a lot of places, it's goofy to tell somebody you have a coach. And like, how can we normalize that a little bit?
Yeah.
And that's a really big marketing problem that I think needs to be addressed. Because a lot of people have shame. I had some shame sharing that I spent so much money to go to NLP training. If I have that problem, like, are people going to really talk about, paying X number of dollars a month to go to a coach? I don't know. It's a situation. And I'm, on the business side, that's something I'm sure you two are aware of.
Depends on the narrative, right? And that's what I'm definitely want to work on, that people create a narrative of coaching being like in athletics, nobody would not work with a coach if you're a pro athlete, and if you want to become better at something, obviously you're going to get a coach. And while athletics coaches work in different ways, depending on what kind of coach you are, there is no stigma around that at all. There's more stigma around not having one.
I can't get the kind of athletic coaches I want. So I'm still trying to find a really good ski coach, right? Like, and I live in a ski town. Like, how can I not find a good ski coach? It's silly. Interesting. Like, there's all sorts of weird rules in place in that whole scene. if I wanted to pay $700 a day, I'm sure I could get one, but there's not a chance I'm doing that. Yeah.
What are the new noticeable trends in this world that we haven't maybe discussed yet?
There's so many. It's crazy what's happening.
Well, give us some.
So looking at the time, maybe pick one.
Yeah. So, oh shit. The one I'm really excited about, and this is more pharma than coaching, but it's genetically engineered yeasts and bacteria extruding either the drugs themselves or the precursors. So
anyone can make
I'm really
anything.
excited about this. This one company in like Carlsbad or something, like down south, they got in California, for those not in the know, 65 different strains of genetically engineered bacteria and yeasts to extrude MDMA, mescaline, psilocybin. There's a company in Miami that
cocaine.
Recently,
I've heard anything.
So I made a tweet about this the other day, Heather. So it's not like I haven't really used cocaine the way it's supposed to be used, and I'm okay with people using it. It's a fucking obnoxious drug, right? But it's also filled with bad karma on account of how many deaths go into the production trail. So can we make a dent in the drug war, both in funding the DEA and cartels, by democratizing GE cocaine producing bacteria and yeasts? Like as much as I think, cocaine's not to be
bad.
used.
Yeah.
It's mostly gross, but I'm still there for a legalized, regulated, safe market for everybody.
Oh, that's really cool.
Therefore, just a healthier supply line. Fair trade cocaine that doesn't destroy the rainforest. If you look at what it's done to Colombia, it's not cocaine that did it. It's the drug war that did it. Like the drug war has, made more guns go to more people that shouldn't be having them, to force people to do things and, to destroy huge swaths of the Amazon.
Mm-hmm. Well, with the bacteria, with this bacteria too, it opens up doors to anyone, anywhere being able to synthesize these things.
Any garage.
Any garage, anywhere in the world, free, like it's going to be free, accessible information. And so that's really cool. It opens up a lot of doors.
Right. So I kind of come from this like hacker software world. So I'm always like, encrypt and democratize, like what can we encrypt and democratize? And there's a lot left to democratize. Sorry to leave everybody hanging on the cocaine topic.
No, I know. We don't need to go there. Sorry.
Wade Davis. Do you know Wade Davis, National Geographic Explorer in Residence, Canadian kind of legend? No. He was a really early, he was a student of Schulze's, a guy that kind of identified ayahuasca in the Amazon. First English guy, I think, and English speaker. And he was a student of this person. And I had him on the show not that long ago, Wade Davis. And he started yelling about how he hates cocaine and cocaine culture and all this stuff. And he's done a lot to save the Amazon, more than most. He's probably in the top 5% of people that have done something there. And, his just lack of recognizing the impacts of the drug war was really complicated to me. It's like, we need to understand what macro things are going on and really impacting these things downstream. Like, what's the net benefit of, the drug war? Making more people go to prison. I think as coaches, like, let's coach culture to go in the right direction here. Less people in prison, more happy, healthy people doing more beautiful things.
That's a whole nother conversation. One I'd love to have, one I think more coaches should be aware of, because we are always in nested systems, and the drug war is one of those. And then there's agendas coming in, but like, again, it's another conversation. We have only a little bit of time left. There's two questions I still want to ask you. One is, have you ever had to stop working with a client? Like somebody who was either in preparation for something or integrating, and you just like, I need to refer you to somebody else, or we just need to stop this.
We don't mean that you walked out of the room mid-trip. Bye.
I'm late for dinner. I got a reservation at 7.
Sorry, nap time.
No, I don't think I've ever had to do that. I don't think I've had enough clients where that would have happened. like a little bit in breath work here and there, but it's not to the point where like you can't come anymore. Never like that. Or, yeah, so no, but I can't imagine that happening. I know of that happening, for sure. And it's complicated, right? Like you should not be doing psychedelics, like, or, you know, you should go to this particular, these 3 therapists, and I'm sorry, we can't chat anymore. But that's a big deal. That's got to be heartbreaking as a coach to have to do that.
It depends how it's transmitted, right? And I have that conversation a lot when I train coaches. It's like, you don't want to make somebody feel like you're rejecting them, or they're too broken for you to work with them, or, you know, you just don't want anything to do with them. But what you can have that conversation in a way that you come from a position of care. You know, I care so much about you working with the right person that I'm recognizing that my skill set isn't enough for me to help you as efficient as I could, or as I would want you to be helped. And hence I'm putting the option on the table for you to work with somebody else here, you know, or I'm saying I can't go any further down this particular path or this door that we just opened, because I don't know what I'm doing behind this door, you know, and it's not you, it's me. And I know somebody who does that kind of work behind those doors all the time. And I'd love to connect you both.
Let me help you get there as a bridge. Because I just had a friend that was basically dumped by their therapist, and she felt so alone and just abandoned. And like, that's not okay either. It really has to be a bridge.
Yeah.
That clinical space, like there's some therapists that do that very poorly. Yeah. There's a lot of therapists Coaches that shouldn't have a license. Yeah, totally. Yeah. I bet. And like I had to help somebody this winter, and I was horrified by how they were treated. I think they got dumped by 3 therapists in a row.
So
one of them
okay.
has now like multiple complaints on them. And this is somebody that very likely could have committed suicide. And
these people, like, I wish more bad practitioners would be reported. And I think that's a problem in the coaching space. And one of the arguments that speaks for regulation is that, you know, if there's a bad coach, you don't know what to do with that, because you can't stop them from practicing, because there is nobody regulating that. And there's a lot of things wrong with regulation, but like, at least there's somewhere you can go and say that person shouldn't be working with people because it's really not safe. But again, we've had that. I think we can leave that here as a word of warning and as an open question, because there are no solutions. The last one is, if you could take over the screen of any person or group and transport a message to them, transmit a message to them, to anybody, whatever it is, and you have a minute, you know, it's a minute of somebody's or a group's undivided attention. Could be the whole world, could be Donald Trump, you know, could be every ayahuasca practitioner on the planet. What would you tell them?
Oh, that's such a big question.
I know. Take your time. You've got 4 minutes.
I'm leaning towards I'm leaning towards the United States as a whole and using some Buckminster Fuller lines. Like there's this line that really stuck with me ages ago. Like, what was it? Something along the lines of spaceship Earth did not come with any kind of instruction manual. And we are, you know, our lives are here to kind of build that out for ourselves. And we need to like really this is a hack of a paraphrase. So I'm kind of done paraphrasing. I'm like, we've got to figure this thing out. Like we're on a really small planet. You know, the climate crisis is accelerating. Extinction is accelerating. Pollution generally is accelerating. Corporate greed, blah, blah. You know, I could go on for ages in just listing it. So we need to radically transform how we're operating here on this spaceship, which is Earth, and understand how to coexist and like work towards a healthy future. You know, if it's, you know, the Musk future, cool, whatever. If it's more of a permaculture agrarian future with some psychedelic experimentation going on, cool too, whatever. You know, we just got to really understand that we are in a really delicate balance on this planet. And the time is now to get active and figuring it out. Yeah. And the most valuable thing on the planet is a thing that came up for me recently. For me, is our genetic diversity. It's how much genetic diversity we have. And we're losing it at one of the fastest rates ever seen in history on the planet. So what can we do to help?
Right.
Should we be flying to Peru all the time? Probably not. Make friends with your local shaman, and develop a local religion and practice around this stuff. Not necessarily, flying all over the world all the time. The world can't handle that.
Mm-hmm. Right. Thank you.
You got it.
And where can people find you? Your work, obviously Psychedelics Today is a big platform. Anything else you want to tell people or let people know?
So we've got, psychedelicstoday.com. We've got a really good Facebook group. If anybody's still on Facebook, Psychedelics Today group on there. We're trying to figure out Facebook alternatives as we speak. We've got a really great education available, psychedelicEducationCenter.com, but you can get there from our main site too. I think we're going to be involved in a number of events in the near future, so just stay tuned. As soon as we feel safe, we're going to be doing breathwork workshops and in-person education all over. Yeah, so just stay tuned. We're probably going to be near you in the nearest future. I don't think breathwork is going to go until 2022, unfortunately, but there might be some other stuff, so stay tuned.
Fantastic. Joe, thank you so much. This has been a really good conversation, and I appreciate you taking all the time that you did and supporting the field. I really appreciate deep thinkers, and we need more philosophy in every field. So I'm glad we have it in this one.
Yes, thank you.
More talk about the empire. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joe.